So let me ask you, since we're a nice smaller group, this is by far the smallest group, which is good. Why did you come to this session today? What were you hoping to learn? What did you want to find out? Why did you pick it? Don't be shy.
Coming
Thank you.
back here. I'm just going to start in the back.
I wanted to pick up some strategies to unsilo our staff.
Unsilo your staff? Boy, I've heard that a few times today.
Okay. Who
There's
else?
more
would
hands
like-
over here.
All right, I'm coming around. Just keep them up high.
It was a similar purpose. We also we have the same people on all of the same teams everywhere, and we feel like it's time to start training some other stakeholders in the building.
Okay.
All the specialists are always in all the team meetings.
Perfect.
Just pass it behind you when you're done.
To be honest, Dr. George, I just recently watched you on the Patent Pod.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you did a couple years ago,
Yeah,
and you
I
did
can
a
remember.
really nice job explaining like the pillars of MTSS and the components that make up,
Okay.
and really did a nice job explaining it. And so I was just really eager to hear
Okay.
you speak again.
Perfect. Thank you. And I just said yes. I honestly have no idea when I did that. So, but everything's like 2 years is good. That's pre-COVID. That's probably when we're above surface again. So, yes.
Speaking of honesty, I just picked a random room and walked in, and you looked interesting. So I decided to
That's
stay.
honest. Did you find
But when she said about everybody doing, like at their school, everybody being the same people on the same committees,
Yeah.
we talk about that all the time. There's a group of us that volunteer and do everything. So
All right. Well, I'm going to
it's a
challenge you
good
some
fit.
today. So, excuse me 1 second. It could have been in the room I was in last time. No, it was Oh, that's right. See, I remember plugging it in.
Yeah, it
So-
might be the first session, but because we were there twice.
Yeah, I think it's the first room.
So they're,
But-
that session, our technique and love is the very south.
Perfect, thank you, I appreciate it. I was asked about, by the gentleman, one of the gentlemen, the tech people, if I was gonna plug my computer, and I said, no, I don't do that because I've left so many power cords places. I'm just sure that I have 100% battery. I turn around, I left my power cord in one of the previous rooms, which is exactly why I don't do it, but I did it. Yes, other questions or comments? All right. How many of you here are involved in some level with the delivery of professional learning? Okay. Are you all patent people or? So, okay. So I was asked to do this professional learning and cross-training. We'll talk about cross-training second, but something I want you to start thinking about. So I've been around forever, I'm old, and a number of years ago, when I was working in Illinois, we had problems getting systematic behavioral observations completed. Because at that time, basically the only people who were really trained to do it were school psychologists and a few places that had what has now morphed into behavior specialists. But we had a tremendous need for it because that's when that behavioral observation thing was added for a number of required tasks that you had to do with certain kids. So we developed something it was called iSNAP, the Illinois School Nurse Achievement Program. And over a summer, we trained every school nurse in the state of Illinois to do systematic, structured behavioral observations, tally the data, and interpret the results. And the rationale for that was because with so many kids on medication and so many issues about this kid has got ADHD, this kid has got that, this kid, so you make certain assumptions, right, that ADHD kid can't pay attention. And we thought having nurses collecting behavioral data, particularly for kids who were on medication, was the ideal thing to do? Well, it relieved so much backlog of stuff for students to do it. So then we started looking at other things to cross-train with. And in Florida, where I'm from, in 2004, we launched MTSS, Integrated Academics and Behavior, between the RTI project and the statewide positive behavior project. And we started cross-training then. So I want you to think about this. So when we get, you've done some pre-thinking. Think about services that kids need, that right now, unless, particularly if it's an itinerant person, you have to wait for somebody to do one of those things. Could be data. It could be explaining what MTSS is like. If you can think of services that kids need now that you don't have the personnel to do, and make a list of them. Because I've come with some examples, and we're going to talk about what cross-training looks like within this context of MTSS. Now, the cool thing about cross-training is you almost always do it job embedded, by hand over hand, shadowing, those types of things. So that's one thing to think about. I'm going to also ask you to think about some barriers. And I will tell you the most obvious barrier so that you can think of some unique ones. The most obvious barrier is, well, if everybody can do that, what's my job? Or you get, and I am a school psychologist, not practicing now, but well, that's what school psychologists do. That's what nurses do. That's what behavior specialists do. Certain thing is tied to a certain professional or a profession. That puts students at risk from getting the services that they need because of adult issues. Adult issues should never interfere with services that kids get. So think about that, and then I'll give you some examples. We'll talk about what cross-training looks like. It has one goal: increase the amount of services accessible to kids when they need it. Okay? And this amazes me, and I kind of pick on this all the time. But probably what I think is a crazy example of cross-training is Botox. You used to be only able to get Botox from a physician who is trained in that kind of stuff. Now you can go to almost any place where you get a spa, and somebody is willing to Botox you. Woo! That would be an area I would not participate in cross-training in. So, all right. So let's talk about professional learning. We'll start off with goals for this session, and then we're going to go through, you'll see in a second. So we want to look at the evidence-based model for professional learning. There is one. It's almost never used. Discuss what cross-training really means in an MTSS framework. I gave you a little intro, and you're thinking about some skill sets that you wish you had more of, because it may be limited to like an MTSS coordinator or whatever. And discuss the development of a framework that includes evidence-based practices in professional learning and cross-training. So what do we have in common as educators? Think about different disciplines. What we have in common right now is the MTSS framework. It is basically the only evidence-based, multi-component framework in education. There's a lot of other stuff, but it's not evidence-based. We'll talk about that in a second. We also have evidence-based practices in professional learning. And we have consensus around what we all want for students. Commitment to ensuring that our common goal has priority over specialty priorities and practices. Read that, adult issues. There are very few things that highly educated people, that includes everybody in this room, cannot learn to do with fidelity. And the things that are not included on that list are things that are not needed terribly often. Maybe evaluation, specific evaluation kinds of things. So, professional learning. First, we're going to go over the critical components. Let me see here. I think I may have left that. I did that. I will verbal it. And you can also go to this session and get the handouts go to this and get the handouts from the other session. There are 6 critical components to MTSS. They're there because they contribute statistically to student growth. They are not there because of a conceptual model. So every one of these hexagons, now the pointer won't work, now it won't do it at all. I have arrows that go up here, and the arrows have somehow or other become independent of this and this. They show one, they show all, now they're not willing to show any. So imagine that there's an arrow from collaboration up to the red multi-tiered instruction. That means that if you do collaboration in the right way, it will increase the impact of instruction, and it will result in students growing faster. The same thing with leadership. We discussed in the first 3 sessions that instruction contributes about 33% of the variance that predicts student outcomes. Leadership in a building adds 28 or 29% of the variance. Leadership matters. Good leadership results in faster student growth. Poor leadership results in less student growth. We also discussed the collaboration. So each of these components has a certain amount that, if present in your building will have students growing faster than another building that doesn't have one or more of those components. So that is why the MTSS framework was finally put into federal general education and special education legislation because of its impact on student growth. The other thing that is important, that is frustrating, is that in many states, I'm going to say in most states, PBS is here and academic MTSS is here. They live in the same building, but they don't visit each other very often. And you here in Pennsylvania call it PBS. You call it PBIS? Oh, that's going to say, because we got in trouble in Florida, and we were told by the public broadcasting system that we couldn't do PBS anymore. I was like, how'd you guys, they overlooked Pennsylvania? No, I just didn't pay attention to it. The framework for MTSS, the use of data, the problem-solving process are common to both academic and behavior social emotional. So why there's a PBS team and an academic team, I have no idea. Everything a kid does in school, academically, has a behavioral or social emotional component. Think about that. Every piece of instruction that a teacher does, we were, a colleague of mine from the western part of the state here, we're talking about it over lunch, if you're trying to teach math, there are 7 practices, behavioral practices, that when integrated into the delivery of math instruction, results in higher student achievement. So right there you have behavioral stuff and you have academic stuff. So I can't think of any reason why we haven't fully integrated positive behavior supports and the academic. This is an example. This is, obviously it's from Florida because we have palm trees and all of that kind of stuff. We have no income tax in Florida. Our sales tax is very low and our property taxes are low. And that is because of all of you that come to Florida and pay a 21% hotel tax. So I always try to do something that looks attractive in the wintertime to encourage you to come so that I can continue not to have to pay taxes. So and I had somebody ask me last night, what are your typical tier 2 behavior supports? What do they look like? And I was like, well, in our state, it's things like, we're explicit. We have the instructional characteristics of every tier for academics and behavior. So it's things like social skills training, anger control training, self-control strategies, those types of things. If we're going to get into more cognitive, behavioral stuff, that goes up to tier 3. And so the person asked, well, how do the kids kind of transfer that pull-out social skills stuff into the regular classroom? I said, it's pretty easy. Almost all of Florida uses skill streaming. Arnold Goldstein, who's no longer with us, it is pre-K through high school, and it basically has all of these behavior and social emotional skills, right? So we do some of that in pull-out in tier 2, but every teacher is trained to put students through the steps. Stop and think. Do you want to make a good choice or not a good choice? What are your choices? If the kid doesn't know, we prompt the choices. Make a choice, try it. So even though the teachers don't know how to directly train in social skills, they have to create the antecedents in the classroom environment so that those social skills will happen, right? That's another example of integrated. If you have behavior people pulling kids out and doing stuff with kids, and classroom teacher having no idea what's going on in there and no way to prompt it, then you don't have integrated. Both the behavior people are working their tails off, teachers are working their tails off, and kids are not improving. This is an adult issue. We have to learn to work together, because everything we ask kids to do has an academic, a behavioral, and a social emotional component. And you can think of that as academic skills, right? Does the kid have the skills to do the task? Behavior. Does the student have the behavior to organize the task? And third, social emotional behavior. Does the student have the will to do the task? So when a task isn't being done, there are 3 hypotheses: academic, behavior, and social emotional. And you've got to, am I making enough point here that I don't have to keep, if some of you would nod your heads, by the way, then I'll stop talking. That's the cue. So in any event. So that's why this is all integrated at every level. Our MTSS, all the behavioral stuff, all the academic stuff is explicitly put in every tier, and then school districts modify it in the way they wish. They do a homegrown version of it. I'm going to make one other comment about, this is it. MTSS is incredibly simple. Ready? There are 3 levels of intensification of instruction. That's the difference between tier 3 is more intensified than tier 1. I would hope, I keep saying this every time I come to Pennsylvania or everywhere else, we need to get rid of the term intervention. It simply has to go away. And I won't tell the long version of the story, but a number of years ago, I am vice chair of the board for the National Center for Learning Disabilities. We do a lot of stuff with students nationwide and blah, blah, blah. We involve students, we get student voice with everything. And I had a student on the spectrum, senior in high school, as part of a panel in a thing we had at Washington, D.C. And at the end, we asked the students if there's any closing comments. We wanted the students to make closing comments because they were involved with every table and blah, blah, blah. And this student said, I'm graduating, going on to college. And he said, so I probably won't be here anymore. He said, so I want to say something to you. He said, ever since kindergarten, I have disappointed my teachers every year. And he said, good thing I'm not driven by guilt. He said, I'd be a mess. He said, because every year my teacher would send me for interventions and expect I would get fixed and come back and not have the need for that intervention anymore. And he said that never happened. He said, I have autism. He said, you don't intervene it out of me. It ain't gonna work. He said, so do this to stop disappointing the hundreds of thousands of teachers who are kind of taught that, oh, interventions will fix it. No, they won't. They tend to lessen, they tend to accommodate, all of those types of things. So we don't use the term interventions in MTSS because the tiers are not separated by them. It's the intensification of the instruction varies by tiers. So those three things differentiate the tiers. As you go up, there's more time. As you go up, you're narrowing the focus of what you're targeting because that's what we're doing with trying to replace behaviors for kids. And the type of instruction varies only when it is required. So there are some aspects of specialized SDI, specialized instruction for kids with disabilities, but we don't vary the type unless we absolutely have to, and that would be just to break the ice and get kids moving. What would be the danger of finding a very specific kind of instruction that was the only thing the student would respond to? What is that a threat to? If that teacher is the only one who knows how to do it, the kid will never transition to a less intensive environment. So we have to be really careful that we don't type our way out of the kid ever being able to be successful in a place where that specific instruction is not available. Right? So we have 3 levels of intensity. We have 3 tiers. I would hazard 50% of the schools in the United States do not have the staff or the time to really do tier 3 instruction. When you think about how much time it takes, this high specialized nature of it. The other thing that we tend to have in MTSS, which is not good, and that's why we're talking about professional learning and cross-training today, you take a look at, this would be a good exercise for you. Go back to your school district or one of the school districts you work with. How many professional staff are tied to tier 1? How many are tied to tier 2? And how many are tied to tier 3? And we put our most difficult kids in the place where we have the fewest people. So we have another mantra with MTSS. Tier 1, what does everybody do to help all kids? Tier 2, what does everybody do to help some kids? Tier 3, what does everybody do to help a few kids? Words matter. And the idea that this is a conveyor belt where you send kids off to have somebody else work with them, and you don't know whatever's going on there. How are these kids ever going to work their way back to an environment that can sustain these new behaviors that the kid has learned? So that's what the tiers mean. That's easy. Intensification, we do it doing those 3 things. Red is most intense. Tier 1 is least intense. The second part is we don't make any decisions without data. 2 bumper stickers. In God we trust. Everyone else brings data. And data will set you free. We talked about in a session earlier today how to organize all data into the same interpretation system. I had conversations again at lunch and a couple of other places today about how the fact that data meetings, they last like 30 and 40 minutes, and after 30 and 40 minutes, all people have done is transfer data from one thing to another sheet called a surf sheet or something like that. Every data meeting should end with an action plan. The only reason you look at data is to do something. You never look at data to look at data and organize it. You look at it so that a group of professional people can see what is going on and then have a discussion about what are we going to do about it. So that's a little bit different. There's only 3 of these components that are unique to MTSS. One is multi-tiered instruction, the other one's problem solving, and the third one is data evaluation. The bottom 3 are present in, you have leadership everywhere else, you have capacity building, you've got collaboration, but the top 3 are what define MTSS within the context of the bottom 3. Okay, so with all that, hopefully you're now thinking about having enough people in your building. Now I'm going to tell one more story and then we'll move ahead. In your building to be sure that the MTSS, what is MTSS conversations stay within the rails. Every time I work with a district, at the district level, and then if I'm not working with the schools, they work with the schools. Every district and every school has to develop its own 1-minute elevator speech about what MTSS is. In case they're stuck on an elevator, that see the MTSS t-shirt and say, what's MTSS? You have until the next floor to give them a basic understanding of it. If you're going to take 10 or 15 minutes to explain it, you'll be riding the elevator up and back down all by yourself. So we need more people who feel as if they're MTSS educators. So one way to do that is every time you have professional learning, if your teaching and learning framework is MTSS, then the first 4 slides are reminding people again and again and again that tiers are differentiated by intensity of instruction. We vary that by time, focus, and type. And we use data to make decisions. That's it. Every one. So if we take a look at professional learning, this is, somebody asked about in the back, how do you get the staff out of a silo? Okay? Take a look at this, at what is top to bottom here. Because you're really talking about silo, you're talking about what's at the bottom, right? Beliefs and mindsets. So professional learning impacts skills. Skills impact practice. Improved practice improves implementation. Better, improved implementation impacts student outcomes. Better student outcomes shift beliefs. So the answer to your question is don't start off with having a conversation trying to shift people's beliefs about stuff. Those beliefs are there for a reason. Any psychologists in the crowd? Okay. So cognitive behavior therapy is about, and I am one, so cognitive behavior therapy is about developing alternative or alternate schemas about why something happens. If that gets powerful enough, you will operate on that schema. But the old schemas never go away. So we look at things like, and I'm not getting political here, but we look about things about racism. Why is it continuing to be so immutable? And it's basically beliefs, those schemas never go away, but you can give competing ones that ultimately will be the choice. That's what this is about. Change kids' performance and you will shift educator beliefs. So the question then is, how do we do that? So I'm going to tell you straight up that there's not a lot of research about effective professional development. And there's a reason for that. It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do, because we have all these things we'll see in a minute that I just went through with you. About 7 years ago, the state of Florida calculated that they had spent in 1 year almost $2 billion on teacher professional learning in 1 year. Now, we're a big state. We're the third largest state in the United States with the third largest number of students, third largest number of teachers. We're huge. But $2 billion. And the legislature came back and said, what do you have to show for it? Can you show us that any of this has helped Florida achieve some of its student goals? And they couldn't. So then they went, of course, the opposite direction and said, every professional learning now has to be in this model and it has to show student outcomes. But then they never enforced anything, or I mean, they said it had to be. So it changed how we did professional learning in response to that, because the punishment was not being able to do it at all. So the only organization that really represents professional learning is Learning Forward. And I put that there. They have standards for professional learning. They also have fidelity guides for professional learning. So if that's something that you want to look into, feel free to do it. But these are the 4 things we're going to talk about briefly, and then I'm going to have you talk about it. 4 steps. Standards-based professional learning, that means it was done with fidelity. Okay? Second, it changes educators' knowledge and skills. Third, that change changes practice. And fourth, practice changes result in improved student outcomes. Now, on the surface, that seems pretty straightforward. But I'm going to say something here, and then I'm going to give you I want you to talk about it. So when you leave here today, these 3 days, you've had a lot of professional learning. And it could affect your knowledge. I don't know about skills, because skills you really do need the opportunity to practice. Or dispositions or beliefs. How might it do that? Next, in each of the sessions so far, I've asked everybody when they leave to pick one thing from the session. Or if they got nothing from it, say nothing. Pick one thing to follow up on. Unless there's some kind of connection from here, you're not going to make it to changes in educator practice. Unless you think, these skills are going, how are those skills, how am I going to do that differently? We talked about lesson planning, and I said, I always integrate UDL into lesson planning, the 3 principles. Multiple ways to present information to kids, multiple ways that kids can demonstrate to you what they know, and then the degree to which, in developing the lesson, we have taken student engagement in mind to maximize the student engagement, right? So if that's what you took away, and you then went back in your lesson planning, and in that step, added those 3 things, that would be evidence of changing your practice. But then the last one is, are the kids improving as a result of lesson planning that way? Now think about trying to do research on that, controlled research. It's almost impossible. So we do have these best standards. So we're going to break them down very briefly into the components of them. Standards-based professional learning. If you have it, awesome. If you don't, then you either don't have planning time, you don't have leadership support in prioritizing the lesson planning process, you're not ready to learn it because it may be a lower priority. It's delivered in a way like this as opposed to job embedded where you're really in there doing it. And there's no way to evaluate the fidelity of it. Or all of those things. Any of those things, when they're not present, could weaken the delivery. Make sense? Okay. Changes in educator knowledge, skills, and dispositions. Self-study, homework, job embedded. Coaches. Patton has got the best statewide professional development system in the United States. And part of that, and I've been working with Patton for how long? Too long. A long time. But one of the reasons that I always enjoy working with Patton is that Patton's got coaches out in districts. They follow up with this stuff because the learning to practice is a hard leap, a lot of steps. And you thought you understood this when you were in this session, and then 2 weeks from now you go try to go do it, and you're like, "Ah, I don't remember anything." So there's got to be supports in place to take that knowledge and begin to move it. Changes in educator practice, all of those things are ways to move from knowledge to practice. I don't know about you, but I did a lot of stuff during COVID on Zoom. I helped Arkansas establish a program for novice special education teacher supports. Because a lot of times you can't get enough special educators and they get stuck out in a school all by themselves, never been in a school. They just came out of teacher school and now they're in kids school, right? We were able to do stuff on Zoom sessions that we couldn't do face-to-face because of the logistics of it. So we're all hoping that after COVID, certain things still Zoomed. Parent participation in multidisciplinary and IEP meetings went up 60% because they could Zoom in. Lesson planning started being done on Zooms because it couldn't be done while the kids were together, where the kids were there. Zoom really adds a huge dimension, and it also is a great technical assistance and support. Unless I need to actually go demonstrate something to a person, I do most of my coaching on Zoom. Because I can say, let's try this. When do you think you can try it that way? And let's say the person says, Wednesday. I'll say, then great. Then schedule a follow-up session to this anytime after Wednesday. So they try it, then they have somebody. These sessions last 10 or 15 minutes. They're quick. People just need reassurance or like, oh, I totally forgot about that. All right, I'll do it again. So just doing this here is not going to be helpful unless we have this here. So this is a research. I want to be sure it's the right, yes. This is a research article. It was done, I think, in North Carolina's Algazine, those people are in North Carolina, looking at the TIPS problem-solving process. And they had TIPS, it's been in North Carolina forever. But when people would observe teams, it's like, what? Tell me what TIPS stands for, because I don't see no TIPS here. So they developed, and I don't want to exaggerate here, they took 34 elementary schools and went in a randomized control trial format by having a wait list. So they took some, did them while these people waited, but they collected data on these people. And then that cohort would move in, get trained, and there would be people doing it however they did TIPS. You can read the story, the rest of the results here. Within the context of randomized waitlist control, team members who were the first recipients of the intervention demonstrated greater implementation integrity in using the problem-solving process during their team meetings than did members of the PBIS teams on the waitlist control. So all these people out there thinking they know how to do it, but until they got training using this kind of model, there was no improvement in practice. Another study that is cited in here, Matt Burns and a group, also in the same area, looked at what happens to kids when the problem-solving team uses all the steps. They found out that the growth of the kids, the effect size was huge, almost a standard deviation, which in effect size research is phenomenal. And the effects were like a thermostat. The fewer of the steps that were done correctly, the lower the student outcome. So when you look at that problem-solving hexagon on the MTSS framework, problem solving, when done correctly, will add a huge amount to student growth. But it starts with professional learning done the right way. Make sense? Okay. And then changes in student outcomes. So this is the Burn study, I think. I have to look at it. Yes. So take a look at this. Once they had problem-solving educator practice with fidelity done well, now the question was, what about student outcomes? Effects on student outcomes, academic or behavioral, was large, an effect size basically of 0.9. On system outcomes, reduction in referrals to special ed was also significant. It was moderate, not quite as much as the student outcomes. And on team outcomes, procedural fidelity was even better than student outcomes. So I'm going to give you one example, and then I'm going to ask you to have a discussion. So when we do problem solving, we have a fidelity checklist. If the 5 of you, 6 of you are on a team, and you're doing problem solving, whether it's large group, small group, or individual. I get evil eyes. Any one of those groups, large, small, or individual. One person on the team, and you this week, you next week, cross-training, you next week, you just have the fidelity checklist, and as you're doing the work, you check off the steps you've done. If you forget it, and this is your week, you go, whoa, 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 we didn't do this. At the end, you crumple it up and throw it in the trash can. It takes no time to do fidelity when you have it embedded in the process. And when you have that fidelity, you get better student outcomes. So you can go, I've given you links to these research articles if you want to go take a look at it. Okay. I would like for you, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. It's a smaller group. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to discuss if this is what professional learning is supposed to look like. I'm just going to call it fidelity, change in knowledge, change in practice, change in outcomes. 2 questions. Do you do all of these steps? 2, do you have documentation for the outcomes of these steps? So documentation for step 1 would be fidelity checklist. You use PL, good, you have a fidelity checklist. How are you measuring educator knowledge skills as a result of that? So for example, in Florida, whatever the goal of the PL is, there is a mastery level exercise at whether it's 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day, that measures the critical knowledge and skills essential to do this practice. And it's mastery level. So you have to pass it, but it's mastery level. That's an example. So does your PL look like this? What do you have that you could build on? And what do you see as the barriers to doing PL this way? 5 minutes. Have a discussion. Just whoever's around you, just get in discussion groups so you're not talking and agreeing with yourself. I'll give you a 30-second warning. Can you just raise your hand and just give one statement that kind of reflects what you talked about? You know, I mean, because you do enough, people will probably.
Okay. I didn't even realize you were coming at me. I spoke for myself for our network about number 2, that we obviously have lots of growth to do with PD, but there is never a moment where at the end there is some like CFU or mastery task
Right.
or anything. We do it and send everybody on their way, and then walk through X amount of weeks or months later and are shocked when it's not occurring in classrooms or people are struggling with it. And this idea that, I think we all know we don't do a great job with like adult education, And if it were a group of kids, I would do an exit ticket or check for understanding.
Sure.
I would target, I would do reteach, I would have a small group, I would have tiers. I wouldn't say you all got it, peace out, go do it. So we have lots of growth to do at number 2.
So let me also offer another format for that. This could be an option, is when you leave the PL, you have 3 days or what have you, whatever, to do that exit exercise and send it back so that people can be thinking about this back at the ranch. There's a lot of ways to do it. It doesn't have to be a quickie exit ticket or.
No. I mean, anything would be
Any-
great. We
anything.
got nothing right now, so.
Right,
So,
right.
area
But-
for growth.
And you would also want to have it in some kind of outcome that would be something like multiple choice. And you would want to have the rationale for what the correct answer was, so that if somebody misses it, they would go back to an immediate reteach. So there's a lot with technology, there's a lot of ways to do that. This isn't about beating teachers and educators over the head. It's about trying to ensure that they take away what needs to take away. So I like your ideas. Other comment about what you talked about. How you would amp up this PL model in your district. What did I say, some things I said that you think you're doing well at? Yes.
One thing that we talked about, and it kind of circles back to like the unsiloing of like specialization and skill sets. And in our district, we were just talking about how we're a little starved for like appropriate PD, or at least like the kind of PD that we need. And one of the things our school is doing is looking at our in-house experts. You know, we're like master degree
Yes.
to the roof, PhD in the building, and setting up unconferences on collaboration days where we can share like things that we are really strong
Yes.
at in classroom, like tier 1, classroom instructional strategies and things like that. So we're running that in February, and that's been a way for us to get some PD.
Right. Do any of your districts do any data collection around practices, skills, beliefs before PD? So, and if you want to write this down, I thought about this morning, and it's my bad. I should have had it down here. Just write down Florida RTI, one word, .usf.edu. That will take you to the project's website. In that website, you will find a lot of categories of stuff to look at, but one of them is evaluation tools. And for MTSS, we developed and validated 3 tools. One is beliefs, one is practices, and one is skills. The skill lists all the MTSS skills, and you self-evaluate. I have these skills, I don't have these skills. The practices are what you see happening in your school. These things are happening in my school. And the beliefs or dispositions are really mindsets. And the person in the back who was asking about how do you get around the silo stuff, you then can aggregate those data. And when I work with the school district, all of that is done first. It's done anonymously. And then I create pie graphs, or the program creates pie graphs, so that in our first meeting together, we talk about, here's where you say you are. It's not like where I say you are, but here's where you say you are. And a lot of the issues around the silo stuff and the beliefs, it's interesting when the majority don't share that. And you don't have to say to the person, you're an outlier, but that little bit of orange that says 9% believe that, whatever that is. And I will say when I presented, I said, I want you to reflect for yourself how you feel if you're blue and green. Let's say those are the big. And now, looking at this, what is your personal reflection if you're in the 5% and the 8%? We don't have any group discussion about that. But obviously what it's saying is, my belief system is not the same as my colleagues. And nobody has to be interpersonal about any of it. So if you go to that floridarti.usf.edu and you go to program evaluation, you'll find perception of practices, perception of skills, and beliefs. And it's something that as you begin to grow MTSS further, and all of it's validated, everything on the website's free. Everything. All of our training materials are on that website. The stuff about the problem-solving process, everything is on that website. Huh? Yeah, FloridaRTI.usf.edu. Okay? Just say add RTI to Florida. Okay. So I wanted to show you this to see the multiple effects. So this is an article published just a couple of years ago by a PBIS group. And the graph on the left is suspension rates before and after implementation of professional learning and a new way of dealing with behaviors that students get suspended for. On the right here, that's the post. And it's broken out by race and I think socioeconomic status. I don't have my glasses, so I can't. And on the right-hand side is same timeline as the suspension side is improvement in academic performance. Just look at that. So practice clearly changed student behavioral performance, and the change in that behavioral performance had a huge impact on academic performance. So multiple of those boxes were checked, right? It's interesting to take a look at the rates of dropping. Some of those lines are steeper than others, differentiated the categories of students, and also differentiated the categories. So if you take a close look at that chart, we're also looking here at things like equity, a variety of things. So now I want to go to the second part of this. Come on. I don't know what is going on here. Hold on. There we go. The outcomes of implementing an integrated MTSS on the system. On the left side, this was administrators and instructional time gained by the reduction of the suspension. So 601 days of administrative time between those years were saved by the reduction in suspensions. And for the students, is that 19,000? I don't have my glasses. I should have them, sorry, but I don't. I'm not going to check that. So close, 10,000? Anyway, tens of thousands of school days were recouped for those students. Now remember I said academic engaged time is the best predictor of student growth? You take all of these days and these kids are back in school, not being suspended, not even counting the social emotional trauma of suspension. This time alone contributed to some of those improvements in student outcomes. So in doing professional learning this way, so a school district only have to say, here's what we did, here's how our practices changed, here's how student behavior changed, and as a result of that behavior, here is how their academic growth moved up. And besides that, our administrators saved 600 days, and our students are back in class 10,000 plus days. That's the kind of story you want to tell. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I were you and I was serious about what we're talking about today, I would probably either think about how are we going to take a look at the PL and the outcome in knowledge, skills, dispositions. Just think about that. If you already have that, then think about how teachers would document, or could document practices. Just pick one part of it to change, modify, enhance, and see how that plays out. All right? Any comments about this? Or some of these data are shocking. It's like, what? I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that was done in CPS, Chicago Public Schools. Okay, cross-training. Are we done with that? We only have about 10 minutes left. Cross-training, training multiple specialty-specific skills to ensure a variety of professionals can acquire a diverse skill set. These are people that are being trained to do something that their certification or whatever did not include. Increase access of those skilled resources to students. Breaks down barriers and increases access to specialty-specific skills, and focuses on who can implement strategies with fidelity rather than what their title is. Cross-training skills should be aligned with building specific needs. So let's stop there for a second. Well, let's just go through this, and I'm going to ask you to then tell me what you thought about. Systematic behavioral observations, there's no reason why that should be limited to any particular profession. This is an easily trained skill that any educator can learn to do. Use of multi-source data. If you switch to this model of risk level, you can have a very small amount of training and get people being able to interpret growth, how significant the growth is, and then based upon that response, what the instructional guideline is. Use of multi-source data to determine effectiveness of instruction. So let me separate out effective teachers and effectiveness of instruction. You can have highly effective teachers not providing effective instruction because it may be new. That may be a new approach. They may never have done it before. They may not have had the professional learning to do it. So highly effective people, I mean, think about yourself. You're highly effective. Think about something you're not so effective in. And even if it's educational in nature. I'm just not good at that. But it doesn't mean you're an ineffective teacher or an ineffective administrator. So don't confuse effectiveness with personal effective judgment. Problem-solving protocols. In a building, every building principal, every lead subject area teacher or department head, every lead teacher in an elementary school should know how to do problem solving and facilitate it. You don't want to sit around waiting for student support team people to come and do it. We talked about in an earlier session, this needs to begin with teacher and teacher when they first become concerned about kids. That's easily trained across disciplines. FBAs and BIPs, that's easily trained. What is it called? Behavior specialist technician. I'm involved in something where I've been reviewing tons of files. Academic behavior, IEPs, you name it. These files are 600, 700, 800 pages long. And most of the FBAs and BIPs are done by someone called a behavior specialist technician. I don't know whether that's a teacher aide who got some additional training. So I didn't want to offend anybody here, but there's already, teachers are doing FBAs and BIPs, and at least on the files I reviewed, they're awful. So they're doing them, but I suggest they weren't trained how to do them. Academic progress monitoring, effective instructional practices. So when you were thinking about what needs do we have and using this professional learning format, what would you, if I said you can do one cross-training for one skill this year within the MTSS framework and everything we've talked about, what would you pick? What would you pick that you need more people available in every building to be able to do X? What is it? What would be your top priority? There's some. Do we have the microphone? Oh, sorry. Over there. Midway on the right.
Just with the teams that I support, I would say data literacy.
Yes.
We have a lot of students with OHI impairment. So when you mentioned nursing, getting involved with the FBA process and the medical piece of it, you know, I thought that was important, and we can get them involved with that.
Absolutely. Particularly if you're in a place where you have a significant, relatively significant, let's say you have 4 medical conditions that account for 80% of what's going on. That absolutely. No question. I can't tell you how many times, and you sit in these meetings where somebody says, well, the kid is on this. And everybody goes, oh, I have no idea what that is. Yeah. So we say all this stuff. He's on clonidine. And everybody's like, ooh, that sounds not good. So yes, and that knowledge, absolutely. What else would you like cross-training on? Yes.
The evaluation of data and one action step.
Yes.
Just one action step for every goal.
Yes. You can't leave without it. Absolutely. So in order to do this, think about the fidelity part of it. And going back to the data literacy, there should be protocols with questions for the kind of meeting that is being held. So the first question revolves around growth. Who grew? Who stayed the same? Who didn't? The second question is, what are we going to do about it? Everything other than answering those 2 questions needs to be pre-populated before the meeting. And everybody needs to have reviewed that. A couple of sessions ago, the same thing with protocols for problem solving. If a student has got a health issue on medication or what have you, what's the protocol for what educators need to know about that? And getting a report, I've been reading all these reports from psychiatrists. I understand that stuff. It's my profession. It's my skill set. But when reading, I'm thinking, what does the average person who knows nothing about this stuff? It goes on and on and on. You know what they do? Glazed look, and they read down till they see something they understand. So what we want to do for cross-training first is develop the protocols we want the people who are being cross-trained to use. And then focus the training on the protocol. If you do that, you can do job embedded. For every one of your meetings, you could pick something new that you're working on for that year. And if it's data literacy, you'd have a protocol for the questions that need to be answered. What happens is if there is just data dump, whoever's facilitating the meeting is talking about the data, and there's no context for it. So protocols are critical. That start the meeting, here's our meeting norms. Remember, the purpose of this meeting is to determine which of our students continues to grow, which ones are stagnating, which ones are going behind, and then we will develop action steps for these two. Anybody have any questions? Okay, first data set. That's how that meeting should feel and sound. Okay, I'm going to ask you to think about or write down one thing you're going to go away with from today, and you can think as long as you don't drink too much tonight and have a memory loss because of the neurons that quit firing, or write it down. And second, thank you for coming, and you may go home.